Look at the person sitting across from you. If you were to profile their microexpressions right now, you would look for the tiny leaks, the subtle asymmetry in a smile, the blink rate acceleration, the microscopic tension in the jaw. Most people are walking open books, constantly broadcasting their insecurities, their unspoken desperation, and their need to control how they are perceived. Dark personalities, the narcissists, the Machiavellians, the emotional predators, spend their entire lives hunting for these exact vulnerabilities. And their favorite target? The empath. The standard empath is a psychological sponge. They absorb the room. They bleed for people who wouldn't even offer them a bandage. They are highly perceptive, yes, but they are reactive. They are easily intercepted, easily manipulated, and easily drained. The predator sees them as an infinite resource. But there is a statistical anomaly in behavioral profiling, a breaking point where the trauma doesn't crush the asset, it forces a total neurological evolution. In the study of human behavior, we map the progression of emotional intelligence. Most empaths stall out at stage 2 or 3, living in a permanent loop of emotional exhaustion. But a rare fraction of a percent reach what is known as the Sophia Stage. Sophia is ancient Greek for wisdom, but in the context of behavioral mechanics, it means something far more clinical: total, systemic de-escalation of the ego. When an empath enters the Sophia stage, they stop absorbing. The sponge crystallizes into a mirror. They look at a manipulator, and instead of feeling the manipulator's pain or absorbing their anger, they decode it in real time. They see the exact childhood fracture driving the current behavior. They see the precise insecurity behind the aggressive stance. This is the most dangerous person in any room, not because they want to hurt you, but because you cannot lie to them. You cannot manipulate them. Every mask you wear, every social persona you've meticulously built to hide your flaws is completely transparent to them. When a master manipulator encounters a Sophia stage empath, the predator instantly feels a sudden, chilling realization. I am the one being observed. I am the one who is completely defenseless. If you have ever felt that your sensitivity was a curse, if you have ever been targeted by someone who tried to dismantle your mind, you need to understand the mechanics of this final stage. Because the difference between being an emotional victim and becoming psychologically untouchable is a single shift in perspective. If you turn away before understanding how this transition happens, you will remain trapped in the lower stages, permanently serving as a source of fuel for the predators around you. But if you decode this blueprint, you will never be manipulated again. In behavioral profiling, we don't look at what people want us to see. We look at the structural baseline. Most empaths have a baseline built on a flaw. They confuse feeling everything with understanding everything. They are hypervigilant. Their nervous systems are constantly scanning the environment for threats, reading the shifts in room temperature, the subtle drop in someone's vocal tone, the hidden tension in a handshake. This hypervigilance isn't a superpower yet. It's a survival mechanism born from past environment stabilization. You learned to read the room so you wouldn't get hit by the emotional shrapnel. The manipulator looks at this and sees a predictable machine. They know that if they pull the lever of guilt, the empath will overcompensate. If they pull the lever of coldness, the empath will chase them. The empath is locked in a reactive loop. But then something shifts. The human mind can only take a specific volume of systemic overload before it either breaks entirely or re-architects its entire operating system. When the empath hits the wall of absolute exhaustion, when they realize that absorbing the toxicity of others is literally destroying their biology, they don't just close off, they evolve. They enter the Sophia stage. And the first thing that dies in the Sophia stage is the desire to fix you. The moment an empath stops wanting to fix people, they become a lethal behavioral observer. When a standard manipulator approaches a Sophia stage empath, they use their usual toolkit. They use the microexpressions of victimhood to garner sympathy, or they use subtle dominance displays, like locking eye contact a fraction of a second too long, or invading personal space to establish control. A normal person responds to dominance with submissive body language, a slight tilt of the head, a defensive folding of the arms, a drop in vocal volume. The Sophia empath does none of this. They don't react with anger, and they don't react with submission. They exhibit what we call zero resonance response. They sit there. Their posture remains neutral. Their blink rate remains steady at roughly 15 blinks per minute. Their breathing is diaphragmatic and slow. They look at the manipulator, and they see right through the behavior to the tactical intent. Imagine a grifter trying to sell a fake diamond to a gemologist who is holding a magnifying loupe. The grifter is talking fast, sweating, creating artificial urgency. The gemologist isn't angry, they are just looking at the flaws in the stone. That is the Sophia stage. When you look at a narcissist, you no longer see a terrifying monster or a tragic project. You see a series of predictable, low-level behavioral scripts running on an ancient loop. Why is this stage considered dangerous? It is dangerous because it completely flips the power dynamic of human interaction. The ultimate weapon of the emotional predator is secrecy. They rely on the fact that you will rationalize their bad behavior, that you will doubt your own intuition, and that you will accept their version of reality. The Sophia empath possesses absolute psychological autonomy. When a manipulator tries to project guilt onto them, saying something like, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me," the Sophia empath doesn't defend themselves. Defense is an acknowledgement of the predator's authority. Instead, they use structural pacing and tactical inquiry. They look calmly at the individual and say, "You're attempting to create an artificial sense of obligation right now, so I ignore the boundary I just set. Why do you feel that's necessary?" It is delivered without malice. It is delivered like a doctor diagnosing a rash. This is what terrifies a dark personality type. They thrive on conflict, or they thrive on submission. They have absolutely no defense mechanism against a clinical, calm exposure of their underlying strategy. It strips them of their psychological armor. It forces them to look at their own naked insecurity. Most empaths never reach this stage because the cost of entry is incredibly high. To get to the Sophia stage, you have to let go of your favorite illusion, the illusion that if you just love someone enough or understand them enough, you can save them. You have to accept the cold, hard data of human nature. Some individuals are structurally broken, and their only objective is to consume your energy to regulate their own unstable egos. The Sophia stage is the realization that your empathy is a finite, high-value asset. It is not a public utility. It is a secure vault. When you reach this level of behavioral maturity, you stop being the prey. You become the investigator. You don't walk into a room wondering if people like you. You walk into a room observing exactly how people operate. You notice the person who overpromises within 5 minutes of meeting you, and you flag them. You notice the person who subtly belittles their colleagues under the guise of humor, and you log it. You see the chessboard 3 moves ahead because you are no longer emotionally invested in the pieces. This is the ultimate evolution of the sensitive mind. You do not lose your ability to feel, you master your ability to direct those feelings. Your empathy becomes a precision tool, used exclusively for those who have earned the clearance to experience it. To the rest of the world, to the users, the manipulators, and the social climbers, you become an impenetrable wall of absolute clarity. They will call you cold. They will call you detached. They will tell others that you are dangerous or difficult. But what they are actually saying, if you translate their behavior accurately, is this: I tried to run my script on them, and for the first time in my life, the script didn't work. Protect your mind. Calibrate your baseline. Step out of the reactive lower stages and claim the absolute wisdom of the Sophia stage. Because the moment you stop absorbing their chaos is the exact moment you take control of the room. Most individuals who identify as empaths are locked in what behavioral analysis categorizes as a primitive, highly reactive state of survival. From an early age, these people have been structurally conditioned to act as emotional sponges, hyper-tuning their nervous systems to the shifting baselines of their environments. When a room grows tense, their heart rate accelerates. When a dominant or disordered personality enters their space, their instinctual response is to absorb the volatility, attempting to metabolize the toxic energy of others within their own biology. This is not a position of strength. It is a profound behavioral vulnerability. This hypervigilance is almost always an unhealed trauma response, a defense mechanism developed in unpredictable environments where reading the microscopic shifts in an authority figure's vocal tone or facial asymmetry was the only way to avoid emotional or psychological shrapnel. Because their operational baseline is entirely externalized, the standard empath is completely predictable to a behavioral predator. A skilled manipulator looks at this reactive loop and recognizes an exploitable asset, knowing precisely which levers of guilt, pity, or artificial validation to pull to force the empath into a state of compulsive overcompensation. The empath bleeds for people who are actively draining them, trapped in a cycle where they confuse the capacity to feel everything with the capacity to understand or control the situation. They remain perpetual victims of their own unstructured sensitivity, constantly running on empty because their system lacks a psychological firewall. The transition to the Sophia stage represents a complete revolutionary rewrite of this entire behavioral architecture. It is the exact inflection point where the asset stops breaking under the weight of systemic overload and instead undergoes a radical neurological evolution. In this advanced stage, empathy ceases to be a passive, porous vulnerability and is re-engineered into a highly calibrated, tactical tool of behavioral regulation. The individual shifts from cognitive empathy, the exhausting process of feeling with someone, into an objective state of absolute observation. The sponge literally crystallizes into a mirror. When a Sophia stage empath walks into a high-stakes environment or faces a calculated emotional predator, their nervous system no longer internalizes the ambient chaos. Instead of absorbing the manipulator's anger, projection, or desperate need for control, the Sophia empath decodes it in real time with clinical, unblinking detachment. They map the behavior back to its structural root, recognizing that the predator's aggression or love bombing is merely a low-level script running to mask a profound internal fracture. By refusing to engage in the expected emotional resonance, they completely disrupt the manipulator's tactical cadence. The power dynamic instantly flips because the empath is no longer a source of emotional fuel to be harvested. They have become an impenetrable wall of absolute clarity. This first keynote is the foundation of the entire psychological blueprint because it marks the precise moment an individual transitions from an easily manipulated target into the most dangerous, unshakable behavioral observer in the room, altering how they interact with human deception forever. The hallmark of a standard human interaction is the constant, often desperate exchange of psychological currency. Most individuals walk through life broadcasting a profound need for external validation, closure, and social alignment. They construct elaborate masks to hide their vulnerabilities, yet their micro-expressions, shifts in vocal pacing and posturing, constantly leak their true condition. Dark personalities, the narcissists, Machiavellians, and covert manipulators are experts at reading these leaks. They exploit the universal human desire to be understood, using tactics like love bombing to manufacture an artificial sense of security or gaslighting to destabilize a target's reality. When a typical empath is subjected to these strategies, their instinctual drive is to fix the fracture, defend their character, or over-explain their motives to achieve a sense of relational harmony. This desire for closure is the ultimate trap. It is the exact handle the manipulator uses to pull the target back into the toxic orbit. The predator relies on the fact that the empath cannot tolerate being misunderstood or falsely accused, knowing that as long as the target is trying to correct the narrative, the predator remains in complete control of the psychological terrain. Entering the Sophia stage completely obliterates this leverage by executing a total systemic de-escalation of the ego. When an empath reaches this level of behavioral mastery, they develop what can only be described as a mask of absolute completeness. This is not a defensive wall built out of bitterness or malice. It is a clinical, self-contained baseline of internal regulation that renders them entirely immune to traditional manipulation tactics. The Sophia Stage empath has achieved a state of psychological autonomy where the opinions, accusations, and manufactured crises of a disordered individual carry exactly zero weight. When a manipulator attempts to deploy gaslighting, saying something designed to make them doubt their own memory or sanity, the Sophia empath does not argue, display agitation, or attempt to prove their point. Argumentation is a submissive behavioral leak that signals to the predator that their target is emotionally invested in the outcome. Instead, the Sophia empath observes the attempt with absolute neutrality. Their blink rate remains steady, their breathing remains diaphragmatic, and their expression remains utterly unreadable. They recognize that the manipulator's words are not a reflection of reality, but are merely tactical tools used to induce compliance. Because the Sophia empath no longer requires validation or closure from the outside world, the manipulator's entire toolkit becomes completely useless. Love bombing fails to register because the empath's self-worth is already calibrated to an unshakable internal metric. Guilt trips fail to land because the empath refuses to accept unearned emotional debts. The predator suddenly finds themselves throwing psychological punches at a ghost, hitting nothing but empty air, because the Sophia empath has completely removed their ego from the equation, creating an impenetrable barrier of total self-possession that cannot be breached by any level of interpersonal deception. In the field of behavioral profiling, every predator relies heavily on predictability. Dark personality types, whether they lean toward malignant narcissism, Machiavellianism, or psychopathy, operate within a rigid set of interpersonal algorithms designed to exploit human vulnerability. When these predators interact with the world, they constantly run low-level dominance tests, invading personal space by a fraction of an inch, holding eye contact just a second too long, or introducing subtle passive-aggressive slights masked as humor. They do this to map the target's baseline and measure their compliance. In a typical encounter, a standard target will leak submissive cues, averting their gaze, adjusting their posture defensively, or offering a nervous laugh to break the tension. This tells the predator that their script is working and that they hold the psychological upper hand. However, the entire parasitic dynamic shatters into pieces the exact moment a dark personality type encounters an empath who is evolved into the Sophia stage, triggering a phenomenon known as acute predator recalibration. The Sophia stage empath does not counter aggression with overt anger or defensive posturing, both of which are merely high-frequency emotional leaks that signal vulnerability. Instead, they utilize a clinical technique known as absolute behavioral mirroring, reflecting the predator's microexpressions, pacing, and underlying intent back to them with surgical mathematical precision. When the manipulator attempts a dominance display, the Sophia empath absorbs nothing and reacts to nothing, maintaining a state of zero resonance response. They match the predator's gaze not with defiance, but with a flat, unblinking analytical stare that treats the predator's behavior as an isolated laboratory specimen. This lack of emotional feedback immediately short-circuits the predator's internal wiring. Because dark personalities are hyper-attuned to reading external reactions to validate their own false sense of power, the sudden absence of any submissive or aggressive resonance creates a profound psychological vacuum. The predator expects a predictable payoff, either fear or anger, and when they receive absolute, unreadable neutrality instead, their cognitive processing stalls. As the interaction continues, this mirroring effect begins to induce an intense wave of exposure anxiety within the predator. For the first time in their life, the manipulator realizes that their social mask is not working. It is being looked through as if it were completely transparent. The Sophia empath's quiet, steady posture and controlled, low-frequency vocal delivery act as a high-definition mirror that forces the predator to confront their own naked insecurity and structural instability. The predator's nervous system, highly sensitive to threats to its dominance, detects that the power dynamic has completely flipped. They recognize that they are no longer the apex hunter in the room. They are the asset being observed, profiled, and dismantled in real time. This realization triggers an immediate physiological shift in the predator. Their blink rate accelerates, microscopic tension patterns form around their jaw and eyes, and their verbal pacing becomes erratic. They are forced into an agonizing state of tactical retreat, suddenly realizing that every manipulation script they possess is completely useless against an individual who refuses to play the game, leaving the predator entirely exposed and utterly defenseless inside their own trap. The standard mechanism of human conflict relies entirely on the rapid exchange of emotional momentum. When an individual launches a verbal attack, a manipulation script, or a passive-aggressive accusation, they are projecting high-frequency emotional energy into the environment, fully expecting the other person to absorb that energy and strike back with equal force. This predictable volley of action and reaction is precisely what keeps toxic dynamics alive. A manipulator thrives in the noise of a chaotic argument because the chaos masks their underlying deceptive strategy, allowing them to shift goalposts, rewrite history, and keep the target permanently on the defensive. The moment an empath reaches the Sophia stage, however, they abandon this entire reactive framework and replace it with a highly sophisticated, silent countermeasure built upon tactical silence and advanced, non-reactive listening. When faced with a calculated provocation, the Sophia Stage empath does not engage, defend their character, or offer a counter-argument. Instead, they weaponize absolute silence, creating a massive psychological void in the conversation. In behavioral profiling, silence is one of the most aggressive tools available because the human brain is hardwired to abhor a vacuum. When a person speaks and receives absolutely no emotional echo in return, their internal anxiety spikes. By maintaining a perfectly calm, neutral physical baseline, uncrossed arms, relaxed facial muscles, and a steady, unblinking gaze, the Sophia empath forces the manipulator to sit face to face with the empty space they have just created. The manipulator expects their toxic projection to land on a target and cause damage. Instead, the projection misses completely, leaving the manipulator off balance and overextended. As the silence stretches, the manipulator's internal pressure increases, forcing them to continue talking in a desperate attempt to fill the void and regain control of the narrative. This is the exact moment where the advanced listening capabilities of the Sophia empath come into play. They are not listening to the literal words being spoken. They are analyzing the structural leaks in the manipulator's delivery. They track the accelerating vocal pacing, the pitch spikes that betray rising desperation, and the increasingly erratic logical leaps. Because the Sophia empath refuses to provide a defensive roadblock for the manipulator to fight against, the manipulator is forced to keep driving forward until they inevitably run out of road. Left entirely to their own devices in a room devoid of emotional resonance, the manipulator begins to overcompensate, making wilder accusations, contradicting their own previous statements, and exposing their hidden motives. The Sophia empath allows this process to unfold completely without interruption, letting the individual's own chaotic psychological projections systematically dismantle their fabricated facade. By the time the interaction concludes, the Sophia empath has not fired a single emotional shot, yet the manipulator stands completely exposed, trapped, and intellectually defeated by the weight of their own unraveled deception. The ultimate transformation that occurs within the Sophia stage is not the acquisition of a new emotional weapon, but the arrival of total, unblinking objectivity. Throughout the lower stages of psychological development, an empath's perception is constantly filtered through a lens of emotional optimism, a persistent internal bias that forces them to look at a broken or toxic individual and see only their unfulfilled potential or their hidden pain. This filter is a profound operational hazard because it causes the empath to rationalize abusive behavior, make excuses for blatant deception, and ignore the clear behavioral data staring them directly in the face. When an individual finally crosses the threshold into the Sophia stage, this idealistic filter is completely incinerated. It is replaced by a clinical, high-definition clarity known as absolute sight. The danger this stage poses to the outside world is never born out of malice, vindictiveness, or a desire to inflict harm. Rather, it is the quiet, terrifying danger of an observer who looks at human behavior and sees nothing but the absolute truth, completely stripped of all social masks, carefully constructed personas, and linguistic manipulation. When a Sophia stage empath walks into a room, they are no longer tracking how people wish to be perceived. They are tracking the raw data of how people actually operate. They observe the precise moment a colleague's smile fades when a peer succeeds, noting the microscopic flash of envy that leaks out before the social mask is reestablished. They listen to the hyper-altruistic declarations of a public figure and instantly map the underlying need for control and validation that drives the performance. To a master manipulator, this level of